Welcome to Story Tales. Please like this video and subscribe to Story Tales. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. The California sun beat down on the Naval Special Warfare Training Center at Coronado like a hammer on an anvil. Beck Harlan stood in the back row of the graduation ceremony, his civilian clothes making him invisible among the crowd of families dressed in their finest. 15 years of ghost work had taught him how to blend into any scene, how to become nothing more than background noise. But today, he wasn't here to disappear on the platform. His younger brother Elijah stood at attention with 23 other new Navy SEALs, the trident pinned fresh to his chest. The kid looked good in uniform, straight-backed, proud, everything their father had always wanted in a son. Everything Beck had supposedly failed to be. Ladies and gentlemen, General Quentin Marr's voice carried across the ceremony grounds. These men have endured the most grueling training in the world. They have earned the right to call themselves United States Navy SEALs. Beck watched Derek Harlan in the front row, chest puffed out like he'd personally dragged Elijah through BUD/S training. Their mother, Renee, sat beside him, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Proud parents celebrating their successful son. The son who hadn't disappeared in disgrace. The son who hadn't broken their hearts. The son who hadn't been erased. Each of these warriors represents the finest our nation has to offer, General Marr continued. Then his voice caught. His eyes had found Beck in the crowd. The general's face went pale. They represent. Marr's words died. The silence stretched like a wire about to snap. Colonel, Marr whispered into the microphone, the word carrying across the stunned crowd. You're here. Every head turned. Beck felt the weight of 1,000 stares, but his eyes were locked on his father's face. Derek Harlan had gone rigid in his seat, his mouth hanging open. The man who had spent 15 years telling anyone who would listen that his older son was a coward, a dropout, a disgrace to the family name. The man who had made Beck's name forbidden in the Harlan household. Elijah broke formation, his head snapping toward the crowd. When his eyes found Beck, confusion and something darker flickered across his face. Beck had expected that. His little brother had grown up believing he was dead, or worse, that he had run away like a coward. Beck! Renee's voice cracked across the ceremony grounds. Derek stood on shaking legs. That's not possible. But Beck said nothing. He turned and walked away, leaving his family and their questions behind. Just like he'd done 15 years ago. Just like he'd been trained to do. Some ghosts were better left buried. The Harlan family home in Ridgeview, Montana, hadn't changed much. Same weathered fence posts. Same gravel driveway that crunched under Beck's boots as he approached the front porch. Same American flag hanging limp in the still air that he'd come here first before the ceremony. Old habits always scout the terrain before engaging the enemy. The front door opened before he could knock. Renee Harlan stood there, 15 years older but still recognizable. Her hair had gone gray at the temples, and new lines mapped the worry that had aged her. My God, she whispered. Beck. Hello, Mom. She reached toward him, then stopped herself. We thought. Derek said you were dead? Missing? Disgraced. Beck stepped past her into the living room. Which story was he telling this week? The house felt smaller than he remembered. The mantelpiece that had once held his high school football trophies now displayed only Elijah's achievements. Academic awards, military commendations, photos from boot camp. The shrine to the son who hadn't failed them. Where have you been? Renee's voice shook. 19 years old, and you just disappeared. The Navy said you'd been expelled, that there was some kind of incident. The Navy said what they were told to say. Then tell me the truth. Beck turned to face her. She looked so small, so fragile. Telling her the truth would break her. Telling her that her husband had sold out his own son to protect his reputation. That Beck had spent 15 years in the shadow world, doing things that would give her nightmares, that he'd come home to destroy the family all over again. I can't. The door slammed open. Elijah stood there, still in his dress blues, his face flushed with anger and confusion. What the hell is this? Beck studied his brother. The last time he'd seen Elijah, the kid had been 8 years old, all gap-toothed grins and hero worship. Now he was 23, built like a boxer, and looking at Beck like he'd rather put him through the wall than talk to him. Hello, little brother. Don't. Elijah stepped into the room, fists clenched. Don't call me that. You don't get to call me that. Fair enough. Where the hell have you been? Do you have any idea what you did to this family? Sir, Elijah jerked his head toward their mother. Dad hasn't spoken your name in 15 years. We had a funeral, Beck. We buried an empty coffin because we thought you were dead. Beck felt something twist his chest, but he kept his face neutral. Seems like everyone moved on just fine. Moved on. Elijah laughed, but there was no humor in it. You think this is moving on? Mom cried herself to sleep for 2 years. Dad turned into a ghost. I grew up thinking my big brother was either dead or too much of a coward to come home. And which did you decide on? Elijah's face darkened. After today, after that general called you Colonel, I don't know what the hell to think. Beck looked around the room again. No photos of him. No mention of his existence. As if he'd been surgically removed from the family history. Maybe it's better if you keep thinking I'm dead. Beck, please. Renee stepped between them. Just tell us where you've been. What happened at the Naval Academy? Why did you leave? Before Beck could answer, they heard a truck rumbling up the driveway. Derek was home that Elijah's jaw tightened. He doesn't know you're here. He will in about 30 seconds. The front door opened and Derek Harlan walked in, still wearing his best suit from the ceremony. Former Army Ranger, built like a tank even at 58. The man who had taught Beck how to field strip a rifle, how to read terrain, how to never give up. The man who had given up on his son the moment it became inconvenient to support him. Derek froze when he saw Beck. For a long moment, neither man moved. Then Derek's face went hard, the way it used to when he was about to deliver punishment. Get out of my house. Derek. Renee started. I said get out. Derek's voice carried the authority of a man who'd spent decades giving orders and having them obeyed. You're not welcome here. Beck felt the familiar calm settle over him. The same calm that had carried him through firefights in places that didn't exist on any map. 15 years, and that's all you got to say to me? You made your choice. Live with it. Did I? Or did you make it for me? Something flickered in Derek's eyes. Fear. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you don't. Elijah looked between them, confusion written across his face. What's going on here? What aren't you telling me? Derek stepped closer to Beck, his voice dropping low. Whatever games you're playing, whatever angle you're working, it ends now. You walk away and you don't come back. Or what? Or I'll finish what should have been finished 15 years ago. Beck smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. Dad, you couldn't finish me when I was 19 and stupid. What makes you think you can finish me now? For a moment, Beck thought his father might actually take a swing at him. Part of him almost hoped he would. It would make what came next so much easier, but Derek stepped back. Get out. Now. Beck nodded and headed for the door. He paused at the threshold and looked back at Elijah. Your graduation was impressive. Stay sharp out there, little brother. You're going to need it. He left them standing there, another family gathering destroyed by his presence. Some things never changed, but some things were about to change forever. The meeting point was a diner outside San Diego, the kind of place where conversations disappeared into the noise of sizzling grease and clinking coffee cups. Beck sat in a corner booth, his back to the wall, watching the parking lot through the window. General Marr arrived exactly on time, still in uniform, but looking like he'd aged 10 years since the ceremony. He slid into the booth across from Beck, his movements careful, deliberate. Colonel Harlan. Marr's voice was quiet, respectful. It's been a long time. Not long enough. Beck sipped his coffee. It tasted like motor oil, but he'd had worse. You look surprised to see me today. Surprised isn't the word I'd use. Marr glanced around the diner, then leaned forward. What are you doing here, Beck? You're supposed to be dead? Missing? Whatever story the Pentagon is selling this week. Deep cover. Indefinitely. Beck set down his cup. Cover's blown. Has been for 6 months. Impossible. Your file is sealed so tight that even I can't access most of it. Files can be hacked. Seals can be broken. Beck met Marr's eyes. Someone's been digging into Project Lowborn. The color drained from Marr's face. That's not possible. Lowborn was shut down. Buried. Was it? Marr was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. What do you know? Beck reached into his jacket, and pulled out a thin file folder. He slid across the table. "Read it." Mar opened the folder, his eyes scanning the documents inside. Beck watched the general's face go from confusion to disbelief to horror. "These financial records, these accounts, trace to 3 sources. 2 of them are in my brother's SEAL unit. That's not possible. These men have been vetted. By who? Using what criteria?" Beck leaned forward. "General, 15 years ago you pulled me out of naval officer school and threw me into the deepest black ops program the Pentagon has ever run. You told me I was being recruited because of my potential, my psychological profile, my willingness to do whatever it took. You are. Bullshit." Beck's voice stayed level, but there was steel underneath. "You recruited me because I was sniffing around lowborn, because I'd started asking questions about weapons testing on civilian populations, because my father told you I was becoming a problem." Mar went very still. "Beck, my father was one of the original lowborn insiders, wasn't he? Part of the cover-up. And when his son started getting too curious, he made a deal. Sacrificed the kid to save his own reputation. It wasn't like that. Then tell me what it was like." Mar closed the file and pushed it back across the table. "Your father came to us, yes, but not to sacrifice you, to save you. The investigation was closing in on lowborn, and you were about to become collateral damage. We gave you a choice: disappear into black ops or disappear permanently." Beck felt something cold settle in his stomach. "He saved me, in his way, by letting his family think I was dead or disgraced, by keeping you alive long enough to become something more than just another casualty." Beck stared out the window at the parking lot. A family was loading groceries into their SUV, kids laughing in the back seat. Normal people living normal lives, never knowing that men like him existed to keep their world safe. "What's your mission record, Beck? How many operations? How many lives saved? Classified. 87 missions. 12 countries. Operations so deep that even Congress can't see them." Mar's voice carried a weight of respect. "You've done more for this country than most men do in 3 lifetimes. And now someone's trying to restart lowborn, using my brother's unit. What do you need?" Beck pulled out a second file, thicker than the first. "Everything you have on Rhodes Cutter and Kiplanders. Service records, financial history, personal associations. And I need operational authority. You know I can't give you that. Officially, you don't exist. Then give it to me unofficially." Mar was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his own jacket and pulled out a small device that looked like a standard military radio. "Encrypted channel. Direct line to me. Use it if you need backup." He paused. "But Beck, whatever you're planning, be careful. If lowborn is really back, the people behind it have resources we can't match. Then it's a good thing I don't exist." Beck stood to leave, then stopped. "General, one more thing. My brother doesn't know any of this. I want to keep it that way. For how long? Forever, if I can manage it." Beck walked out of the diner and into the California night. Behind him, General Mar sat alone with 2 cold cups of coffee and the weight of 15 years of secrets. Some ghosts, Beck thought, were harder to bury than others. The on-base bar at Coronado was loud, smoky, and full of SEALs celebrating their latest graduates. Beck sat in a corner booth, nursing a beer and watching Elijah's unit decompress after their first day back from a classified operation in Syria. He'd been studying them for 3 days. Rhodes Cutter was exactly what Beck had expected: loud, aggressive, the kind of patriot who wore his flag pin like armor. He dominated conversations, told war stories that painted him as the hero, and treated the bar like his personal kingdom. Kiplanders was quieter, more careful. He sat slightly apart from the group, fingers always moving over his phone screen. Technology specialist, crypto expert, and according to the financial records Beck had obtained, a man with expensive tastes and a gambling problem. Casey Truitt was the surprise. She sat with the group, but didn't participate in their posturing. She watched everything, processed information like a computer, and when she spoke, the others listened. She'd also been the only one who hadn't stared at Beck like he was a ghost when he'd introduced himself. Beck waited until Elijah went to the bar for another round, then approached the table. "Mind if I sit?" Rhodes looked up from his story about taking out a Taliban stronghold. Depends. You buying? I'm buying. Beck signaled the waitress and sat down. Up close, Rhodes was even more intimidating 6'4", built like a linebacker, with scars that suggested he'd seen serious action. "So you're Eli's big brother," Rhodes said, his voice carrying a challenge. "The one who disappeared. That's me. Funny thing," Kip said without looking up from his phone. "I ran a background check on you. Came up mostly empty. That's unusual for someone with military history." Beck smiled. "Maybe I'm just boring. Maybe." Casey finally spoke. Her voice was calm, controlled. "Or maybe you're exactly what you appear to be, which is someone who doesn't want to be found." Elijah returned with drinks, his face darkening when he saw Beck at the table. "What are you doing here?" "Having a beer with my brother's friends." "We're not friends." Elijah sat down hard, his beer sloshing over the rim. "Friends don't disappear for 15 years. Your brother's got a point," Rhodes said. "Family's supposed to stick together." "Sometimes family sticks together by staying apart," Beck replied. Kip finally looked up from his phone. "You know what I think? I think there's more to this story than anyone's telling." "Kip," Casey warned. "No, I'm serious. Guy disappears for 15 years, then shows up at his brother's graduation. General calls him colonel. Something doesn't add up." Beck finished his beer and stood. "Elijah, can I talk to you? Privately? I don't think it's important." Elijah looked around the table, then nodded reluctantly. They walked outside to the parking lot, away from the noise and crowd. "I need you to do something for me," Beck said. "Let me guess. Something involving my unit." "Kip Landers has been moving money through cryptocurrency accounts. Large amounts. I need you to find out where it's going." Elijah's face went hard. "Are you insane? You want me to spy on my own teammates? I want you to ask questions." "Based on what?" "Your paranoid suspicions." Elijah stepped closer, anger radiating from him. "These men saved my life in Syria. They're my brothers. They're my family. They're not your family." "No? Then where the hell were you when I needed a family? Where were you when I was learning to drive, or graduating high school, or wondering if my big brother was ever coming home?" Beck felt the words hit him like physical blows, but he kept his expression neutral. "I was where I needed to be." "Where? Doing what? And don't give me some classified bullshit excuse." "I can't tell you." "Can't or won't?" "Both." Elijah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You know what? Forget it. Forget this conversation. Forget whatever game you're playing. I have real brothers now. Men who die for me, and I die for them. I don't need some ghost showing up and trying to poison that." Elijah turned to walk away. Beck grabbed his arm. "Eli, listen to me. These men aren't what they seem." Elijah spun and threw a punch that Beck barely avoided. "Don't touch me, and don't call me Eli. You lost that right 15 years ago. Your unit is compromised. My unit is fine. You're the problem." Elijah's voice carried across the parking lot. "You're the ghost who haunts this family. You're the reason Dad drinks too much and Mom cries when she thinks no one's watching. You're the reason I spent half my life trying to be good enough to make up for your failure." The words hung in the air between them. Beck felt something crack inside his chest, but he pushed it down. Emotion was a luxury he couldn't afford. "Stay away from my unit," Elijah said. "Stay away from me, and stay away from my family." He walked back into the bar, leaving Beck alone in the parking lot under the California stars. Through the window, Beck could see him rejoin his table, see Rhodes clap him on the shoulder, see Kip go back to his phone. Some missions, Beck thought, were harder than others. The desert outside Tucson stretched like a brown ocean under the afternoon sun. Beck pulled his rented sedan into the parking lot of a roadside diner that looked like it hadn't been updated since the Reagan administration. Perfect place for a meeting that couldn't officially happen. Silas Gorman was already there, sitting in a booth near the back, his eyes constantly moving between the door and the windows. 5 years older than Beck, but he looked like he'd aged 20. Burn scars covered the left side of his face, and his hands shook slightly as he lifted his coffee cup. "You look like hell, Silas. Feel worse." Silas's voice was rough, damaged by smoke inhalation from an IED blast in Afghanistan. "Wasn't sure you'd come. Wasn't sure you'd still be alive." Beck sat down across from his former teammate. They'd served together for 3 years in the deepest black ops unit the Pentagon had ever created. Officially, their unit didn't exist. Unofficially, they prevented 2 terrorist attacks on American soil and stopped a bioweapon from reaching the market. Then Silas had been burned, his cover blown, his identity compromised, his usefulness ended. Beckett thought he was dead. What happened to you? Same thing that'll happen to you if you keep digging into Lowborn. Silas reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope. That's everything I could get without getting killed. Financial records, shipping manifests, communication intercepts. Beck opened the envelope and scanned the documents. His blood went cold. These accounts, they're active. Lowborn never shut down. It went private. Military contractors, foreign buyers, people with money and no conscience. And someone in my brother's unit is feeding them information. Not just information. Test results. Silas leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. They're testing on civilian populations again. Chemical weapons, biological agents, experimental drugs. Everything Lowborn was supposed to have destroyed. Beck felt anger building in his chest like a pressure cooker. Where? Syria, Afghanistan, Yemen, places where dead civilians don't make the news. Silas pointed to one of the documents. These shipping records show weapons-grade chemicals moving through a network of shell companies. The money trail leads back to accounts controlled by Kip Landers and Rhodes Cutter. How do you know all this? Because I've been tracking them for 2 years. Ever since they tried to kill me in Prague. Beck looked up from the documents. They tried to kill you. Car bomb. Would have worked too if I hadn't gotten paranoid and changed my route. Silas pulled up his shirt, revealing a massive scar across his abdomen. Shrapnel got me anyway. Spent 6 months in a hospital. Another year learning to walk again. Why didn't you contact me? Because I thought you were dead. Official records show you died in a training accident 3 years ago. Beck smiled grimly. Rumors of my death have been greatly exaggerated. Yeah, well, mine won't be if they find out I'm talking to you. Silas finished his coffee and stood. There's something else. Something that's going to hurt. Tell me, your father. He wasn't just part of the original Lowborn cover-up. He's part of the new operation. These shell companies? They're run through his defense contracting business. Beck felt the world shift under him. That's not possible. Page 12. Bank records showing payments from Harlan Defense Solutions to 3 of the chemical suppliers. Beck flipped to page 12. There it was in black and white. His father's signature on authorization forms. His father's company funding weapons that would be tested on innocent people. He sold you out 15 years ago to protect his reputation, Silas said. Now he's selling out his country to line his pockets. Beck stared at the documents, pieces of a puzzle falling into place. He knew I'd find out eventually. That's why he tried to get me to stay away. Beck, listen to me. These people have killed to protect this operation. They have resources, connections, money. If you go after them, they'll try to kill me. They'll succeed in killing you. And everyone you care about. Beck folded the documents and put them back in the envelope. Let them try. Don't be stupid. This isn't some terrorist cell in Afghanistan. These are Americans. Military personnel. Government contractors. They have legitimacy, cover stories, plausible deniability. They also have a weakness. Which is... Beck stood and headed for the door. They think I'm dead. He left Silas, sitting in the diner with a check and a worried expression. Outside, the desert heat hit him like a wall, but Beck barely noticed. His mind was already working, planning, calculating odds and angles. His father had betrayed him twice. His brother's unit was compromised. People were dying because of weapons that should never have existed. But Beck had spent 15 years learning how to be a ghost. Time to remind people why ghosts were dangerous. The remote SEAL training facility sat on 50 acres of scrubland an hour north of San Diego. Beck had been watching it for 2 days, learning the patterns, the schedules, the blind spots in the security camera. At 2,300 hours, Kip Landers arrived alone. Beck followed him through the facility's perimeter, staying in the shadows, moving like he'd been taught in a dozen different countries. Kip moved with purpose, heading toward the communications building where secure servers held classified operational data. Beck watched through night vision goggles as Kip bypassed the security system with the ease of someone who'd done it before. The man was good professional, careful, paranoid about leaving traces, but not paranoid enough. Beck waited until Kip was inside, then moved to the building's rear entrance. The lock was military-grade, but Beck had been breaking military-grade locks since before Kip learned to tie his shoes. Inside, the building was dark except for the glow from computer screens. Beck could hear Kip working in the main server room, the soft click of keys on keyboard. He crept closer, staying low, using the server towers for cover. Through a gap between servers, Beck could see Kip transferring files to an external drive. Classified mission reports, weapon specifications, personnel files. Everything someone would need to restart Project Lowborn. Beck moved closer, drawing his sidearm. Step away from the computer. Kip spun, his hand moving toward his own weapon. Who the hell? His eyes went wide when he recognized Beck. Oh shit. Keep your hands where I can see them. You don't understand what you're dealing with here. Enlighten me. Kip's eyes darted toward the door, calculating distances. This is bigger than you think. Bigger than both of us. The external drive. Slide it across the floor. Kip hesitated, then reached for the drive. Beck saw the movement a second too late. Kip wasn't reaching for the drive. He was reaching for a backup weapon taped under the desk. Beck dove left as Kip's shot sparked off the server tower behind him. He rolled, came up firing, but Kip was already moving, using the servers for cover. Rhodes, Kip shouted into a radio. We got a problem. Footsteps thundered outside the building. Backup was coming. Beck grabbed the external drive and headed for the rear exit, but Rhodes' cutter burst through the front door, assault rifle ready. Well, Rhodes said, his voice carrying across the server room. If it isn't the ghost, brother. Beck stayed behind cover, counting angles and exits. Hello, Rhodes. You know, I was wondering when you'd show up. Kip said someone was sniffing around our operation. What operation would that be? Rhodes laughed. Come on, Colonel. We both know why you're here. Question is, what are you going to do about it? Beck heard more footsteps outside. 3 men, maybe 4. Too many for a straight fight. Depends on what you're offering. I'm offering you a chance to walk away. Forget what you saw here, forget what you think you know, and disappear back into whatever hole you crawled out of. And if I don't, then we kill you. And we kill your brother. And we kill anyone else who gets curious. Beck felt cold fury wash over him. You threaten my brother? I don't make threats. I make promises. Beck pulled a flashbang grenade from his belt and tossed it into the main aisle between the servers. The explosion was deafening in the enclosed space, the flash bright enough to overload night vision equipment. In the chaos that followed, Beck moved. He fired twice, heard someone scream, kept moving toward the rear exit, returned fire-shattered computer monitors, and sparked off metal server cases. He reached the door, but Rhodes was there first, bleeding from a head wound but still dangerous. They collided in the doorway, Rhodes's rifle clattering away as they went down in a tangle of arms and legs. Rhodes was bigger, stronger, but Beck had 15 years of close-quarters combat training. He broke Rhodes's nose with a headbutt, drove his knee into the man's ribs, rolled away as Rhodes tried to grab him. You're making a mistake, Rhodes gasped, blood running down his face. I made worse. Beck heard sirens in the distance. Someone had called in the explosions. Time to go. He ran into the desert, leaving Rhodes and his team behind with their damaged equipment and compromised operation. By the time base security arrived, Beck was already 2 miles away, heading for his extraction point. Behind him, the communications building burned, $15 million of equipment reduced to scrap metal and smoke. But Beck had what he'd come for: the external drive, and proof that his brother's unit was dirty. The hard part would be convincing Elijah before it was too late. The abandoned military airfield in Nevada had been closed since the Cold War, leaving behind cracked runways and rusted hangar buildings that stretched like tombstones across the desert floor. Perfect place for a trap. Beck stood in the main hangar, checking his equipment one more time. Explosives, communication gear, weapons. Everything he needed to end Project Lowborn permanently. This is insane, Elijah said from across the hangar. You're talking about taking on our own people. They stopped being our people the moment they started selling weapons to terrorists. Beck had found Elijah at a bar in San Diego 2 days after the raid on the communications building. His brother had been drunk, angry, and finally ready to listen. The evidence Beck presented financial records, shipping manifests, surveillance photos had been impossible to ignore. Kip Landers had disappeared. Rhodes Cutter was in military custody, claiming he'd been investigating Beck on suspicion of espionage. The official story was that Beck was a rogue operative who'd gone off the reservation. The unofficial story was that Beck had blown the cover off the biggest military scandal since Abu Ghraib. How do we know this trap will work? Casey Truitt asked. She'd joined them after Elijah finally convinced her that something was wrong with their unit. What if they don't show? They'll show. Beck attached a detonator to a block of C4. I've leaked intelligence suggesting that the final low-born prototype is hidden in this bunker. Information too valuable to ignore. And if you're wrong, then a lot of bad people stay in business. Beck had spent 2 days preparing the airfield, turning it into a maze of choke points and kill zones. He'd also spent 2 days trying not to think about the conversation he'd have to have with his father after this was over. Derek Harlan was driving the operation from his defense contracting office in Montana. The man who'd taught Beck about honor and duty had sold both for money and power. The man who'd sacrificed his son to protect his reputation was about to lose everything. Movement on the perimeter, Casey reported from her position near the runway. 3 vehicles approaching from the east. Beck checked his watch. Right on time. Elijah, you're with me. Casey, maintain overwatch and wait for my signal. Beck. Elijah grabbed his arm. Whatever happens here tonight, don't. We'll settle family business after we finish this. They moved into position as the vehicles approached. Beck could see the occupants through his scope. Kip Landers, driving the lead vehicle. A team of Black Ops mercenaries in the other 2. Professional killers, probably former military, definitely well paid. They're armed for war, Elijah whispered. Good. So are we. The vehicle stopped outside the main hangar. Beck watched through his scope as Kip and 8 mercenaries approached the building, weapons ready, moving with military precision. Alpha Team, secure the perimeter, Kip's voice carried across the desert. Beta Team, with me. We find that prototype and we get out. Beck smiled grimly. Some people never learned. The mercenaries entered the hangar, spreading out in a tactical formation. Professional, careful, experienced. But they were walking into a trap 15 years in the making. Beck pressed the first detonator. The explosion shattered the night, collapsing part of the hangar roof and separating the mercenaries into 2 groups. In the confusion that followed, Casey's rifle spoke from the shadows, dropping 2 men before they could take cover. Contact! Contact! Kip shouted into his radio. We're taking fire. Beck and Elijah moved through the hangar like ghosts, using the wreckage for cover, picking off targets with surgical precision. These mercenaries were good, but they were fighting on Beck's ground by Beck's rules. Beck! Kip's voice echoed through the hangar. I know you're here. Let's talk about this. Beck responded by triggering the second explosive charge. More roof collapsed, more confusion, more advantages for the defenders. The firefight lasted 20 minutes. When it was over, 4 mercenaries were dead, 2 were wounded and fleeing into the desert, and Kip Landers and Rhodes Cutter were still fighting. From her position on the runway, Casey's rifle cracked once. Kip Landers dropped, a clean shot through the head. Professional, efficient, final. Kip's down, she reported through the radio that left Rhodes. Beck watched as his brother emerged from cover, moving toward the big seal with deadly purpose. Rhodes saw Elijah coming and smiled, dropping his rifle and pulling a combat knife. Come on, little brother. Let's see what you learned in BUD/S. They came together in the center of the hangar like 2 freight trains colliding. Rhodes was bigger, stronger, more experienced. But Elijah was younger, faster, and fighting for more than money. The battle was brutal. Rhodes slammed Elijah into a concrete pillar, followed up with a knee strike that would have broken ribs if Elijah hadn't twisted away. Elijah responded with a combination that bloodied Rhodes's nose, then a leg sweep that sent the bigger man sprawling. They fought with fists, knees, elbows, anything that could inflict damage. Rhodes pulled his knife, slashed at Elijah's throat. Elijah caught his wrist, twisted, broke it. The knife clattered away across the concrete. This is for threatening my family, Elijah snarled and drove his fist into Rhodes's solar plexus. Rhodes went down hard and didn't get up. Beck approached the computer servers in the bunker beneath the hangar. Empty, just as he'd planned. There never was a prototype here. Beck stood over the body for a moment, then activated the computer virus he'd planted in the servers. Every piece of data related to Project Lowborn, every financial record, every communication, every trace of the operation gone. Beck, Elijah called from above. "We've got company." Beck climbed out of the bunker to find General Marr arriving with a team of military police. The cavalry, arriving just in time to clean up the mess. "It's done," Beck told the general. Marr looked around at the bodies, the wreckage, the smoke rising from the ruins of the airfield. "The Pentagon wants a full briefing. They'll get one, after I finish something else." Beck walked away from the airfield, leaving his brother and the general to handle the official aftermath. He had one more stop to make, one more ghost to put to rest. The drive from Nevada to Montana took Beck 18 hours. He stopped only for gas and coffee, his mind focused on the conversation ahead. By the time he reached Ridgeview, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky the color of blood. The Harlan family home looked exactly the same as it had a week ago when Beck had first returned from the dead. Same weathered fence posts, same gravel driveway, same American flag hanging limp in the still air. But everything was different now. Beck parked his truck and walked to the garage. He could hear someone working inside, the familiar sound of tools on metal, the soft curse words of a man trying to fix something that couldn't be fixed. Derek Harlan was under the hood of his pickup truck, a half-empty bottle of whiskey sitting on the workbench nearby. He looked up when Beck's shadow fell across the doorway. "I've been expecting you." "Have you?" Derek straightened slowly, wiping grease from his hands with an old rag. At 58, he was still imposing broad shoulders, thick arms, the kind of man who'd spent his life solving problems with force. But there was something different in his eyes. Fear, maybe, or resignation. "You look like hell, son." "I'm not your son. Haven't been for 15 years. Derek nodded slowly. "Fair enough." Beck stepped into the garage, noting the exits, the potential weapons, the angles of attack. Old habits that had kept him alive in a dozen different countries. "Tell me about Project Lowborn." "What about it?" "Tell me about your involvement. Tell me about the cover-up. Tell me about how you sold out your own son to protect your reputation." Derek reached for the whiskey bottle, poured 2 fingers into a glass, and drank it down. "You want the truth? I want the truth. The truth is that Project Lowborn was the most important weapons development program this country ever produced. Chemical weapons that could have ended the war in Afghanistan in 6 months instead of 20 years. Chemical weapons that were tested on civilian populations. Acceptable losses. Collateral damage. The price of keeping America safe. Beck felt anger building in his chest like a fire. Acceptable to who? To people who understand that war isn't a game. That sometimes you have to do terrible things to protect the people you love. Is that what you told yourself when you sacrificed me? Derek set down the glass and faced his son. "I didn't sacrifice you. I saved you. By letting everyone think I was a disgrace. By keeping you alive." Derek's voice echoed off the garage walls. "You were 19 years old, stupid, idealistic. You were going to expose Lowborn and get yourself killed. So I made a deal." "What kind of deal?" "Your life for your silence. You disappear in a black ops. I keep your death off the books. Everyone wins." Beck laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Everyone wins? What about Mom? What about Elijah? What about 15 years of thinking their son and brother was either dead or a coward? They got over it, did they? Mom still cries when she thinks no one's watching. Elijah has spent his whole life trying to make up for my failure. You turned our family into a shrine to your successful son while pretending your other son never existed." Derek's face hardened. "I did what I had to do. And now? What about restarting Lowborn? What about selling weapons to terrorists? What about turning your defense, contracting business into a front for war criminals? You don't understand the bigger picture. Then explain it to me." Derek reached for the whiskey bottle again, but Beck knocked it out of his hand. It shattered against the concrete floor, filling the garage with the smell of alcohol and broken glass. "The bigger picture," Derek said slowly, is that this country is under attack, not from foreign enemies from our own government. Politicians who've forgotten what it means to be strong. Military leaders who care more about political correctness than winning wars. So you decided to go into business for yourself. I decided to work with people who understand that strength is the only thing that matters. That sometimes you have to break a few rules to protect everything you love. Beck stared at his father, seeing him clearly for the first time in his life. Not the war hero he'd idolized as a child. Not the loving father who'd taught him right from wrong. Just a bitter old man who'd convinced himself that his greed was patriotism. You're under arrest for treason, conspiracy, and war crimes. Derek laughed. Arrested by who? You? You don't exist, remember? You're a ghost. Beck pulled out his phone and played a recording. Derek's voice filled the garage, clear and unmistakable, discussing weapons shipments and payment schedules with known terrorists. You've been wearing a wire for the past hour, Beck said. Every word recorded, every admission documented. The color drained from Derek's face. You son of a bitch. I learned from the best. You used my silence to build your name. Now I'm here to bury it. Derek's face went pale. You think they'll believe you over me? Beck held up his phone, showing the recording interface. They don't need to. You'll be erased before sunrise. He sent the recording to General Marr, to 3 different military intelligence agencies, and to a journalist at the Washington Post who specialized in defense contractor corruption. It's over, Dad. Harlan Defense Solutions is finished. Your contracts are canceled. Your clearance is revoked. You're going to prison for the rest of your life. Derek lunged at him, moving faster than Beck had expected. They crashed into the workbench, tools scattering, both men fighting for advantage. But Derek was 58 and drunk. Beck was 34 and had spent 15 years learning how to fight for his life. The outcome was never in doubt. Beck pinned his father against the wall, one hand on his throat. You could have been proud of me. You could have supported me. Instead, you used me and threw me away the moment I became inconvenient. I'm your father. No, you're a traitor who happens to share my DNA. Beck released his grip and stepped back. Derek slumped against the wall, breathing hard, blood running from his nose. The FBI will be here in an hour, Beck said. You can run, or you can face the consequences of your choices. Either way, you're finished. Beck turned and walked toward the garage door. Beck, he stopped but didn't turn around. I'm sorry. For all of it. For what I did to you, to this family. I thought I was protecting everyone. You were protecting yourself, just like you always did. Beck walked out of the garage and into the Montana night. Behind him, he heard the sound of his father collapsing to the floor, the weight of 15 years of lies finally crushing him. Some ghosts, Beck thought, deserved to be buried. Beck didn't stay to watch the FBI arrest his father. He drove through the night, heading west toward a future he hadn't planned for, carrying secrets that would die with him. The cabin he'd rented was 50 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by pine trees and silence. Perfect place for a ghost to disappear. He spent 3 days writing reports for agencies that would pretend they'd never seen them. He spent 3 more days destroying equipment and identities that had kept him alive for 15 years that on the 7th day, Elijah found him. Took you long enough, Beck said, not looking up from the fire where he was burning the last of his operational files. Had to track down a ghost. Not easy. Elijah looked older, harder. The past week had aged him in ways that combat never had. Learning that your commanding officers were war criminals, that your father was a traitor, that your brother was a legend, it changed a man. How did you find me? Casey ran your license plate. Amazing what you can do with government databases and a security clearance. Beck fed another file to the flames. What do you want? Answers. Real answers, not the classified bullshit you've been feeding everyone. Some answers are dangerous. More dangerous than not knowing. Beck considered that. Then he told Elijah everything. About Project Lowborn, about Tier 0 operations, about 15 years of missions that didn't exist in any official record. About the people he'd killed, the wars he'd prevented, the nightmares that came with the territory. When he finished, Elijah was quiet for a long time. 87 missions, give or take. How many people did you kill? Enough. Do you regret any of it? Beck thought about that. I regret that it was necessary. I don't regret doing it. Elijah pulled a letter from his jacket and handed it to Beck. General Marr asked me to give you this. Beck opened the letter. It was brief, official, and signed by people whose names he recognized but had never met. Honorable discharge, he said. Full pension, medical benefits, and a presidential unit citation. For services that officially never happened. The best kind. They sat in silence, watching the fire consume the last traces of Beck's operational life. Brothers, but still strangers. Family, but not quite. What now? Elijah asked. Now you go back to being a SEAL. You serve your country, protect innocent people, and try not to become like the men we just destroyed. What about you? Beck stood and walked to the edge of the clearing. In the distance, he could see mountains rising against the sky, wild country where a man could disappear if he wanted to. I'm going to learn how to live without being a ghost. Elijah joined him at the edge of the clearing. Dad's going to prison. 25 to life. Good. Mom's asking about you. She wants to know if you're coming home. Beck was quiet for a long time. Then he pulled a small device from his pocket, a kill switch he'd told General Marr. A way to shut down any attempt to restart Project Lowborn. What he hadn't told the general was that he'd built more than a kill switch. He'd built a resurrection protocol, the ability to reactivate the technology if it was ever needed to protect American lives. Some secrets were too dangerous to share. Some weapons were too important to destroy completely. Tell Mom I'm exactly where I need to be. Elijah nodded. They both understood that some distances couldn't be crossed, some wounds couldn't be healed. If you ever need anything, I'll know where to find you. Elijah walked back to his truck, leaving Beck alone with the fire and the mountains and the weight of 15 years of choices. He watched his brother drive away, then pulled out the small device from his pocket, the kill switch he'd shown General Marr. What he hadn't told the general was that he'd built more than a kill switch. He'd built a resurrection protocol, the ability to reactivate the technology if it was ever needed to protect American lives. Beck looked out at the mountains rising against the darkening sky, his finger tracing the device's surface. Some secrets were too dangerous to share. Some weapons were too important to destroy completely. In case they try again, he said quietly to the empty air. I'll be waiting. In the distance, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky with colors that reminded Beck of blood instead of hope. Some ghosts, he thought, never truly disappeared.